It was just an old wooden boat, the yacht owner scoffed, moments after crushing it beneath his luxury vessel. No apology, no remorse. The American flag that had flown proudly from its bow for 40 years slipped quietly into the water, torn and forgotten. But the next morning, the harbor fell silent. Out of the fog came 6 Navy ships, their flags lowered to half-mast. Who were they saluting? And why had the sea suddenly remembered one man that the town had overlooked for decades? If you still believe that quiet service deserves to be honored, welcome to Grateful Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. I've lived in Bayfield Hollow my whole life, a tiny coastal town tucked between pine-covered cliffs in the cold Pacific waters of Western Oregon. It used to be a place built by calloused hands and sea-worn hearts, fishermen, mechanics, boat builders. These days, the timber cottages are giving way to sleek glass villas, and the mom-and-pop stores slowly replaced by gold-lettered boutiques. I don't complain. Well, I do, just not out loud. I work maintenance down at the docks, fix nets, tune up old motors. Folks around here call me Mr. Tate in that half-respectful, half-familiar way. But there's one man in town I always tip my hat to first, even though he never asked for it: Walter Briggs. He lived in a weather-beaten shack near the southern point of the bay, right where the pine trees give up to salt air and rock. Every morning, before most folks even had their coffee, I'd see his silhouette cutting across the dock. Old service jacket, sun-faded ball cap, thermos in one hand, toolbox in the other. He didn't talk much, but when he nodded at you, there was weight behind it, like a man who'd walked through storms the rest of us only heard whispers about. He owned the last wooden boat in town. Freedom Gale. Built it himself, they said. Oak hull, quiet gray sail. A small American flag fluttered on the bow, frayed a little, but never dirty. He'd put her together, plank by plank, after coming back from the war. Didn't let anybody help. There was no GPS, no LED lights, no fancy navigation. But she ran smoother than anything I've ever seen. Walter understood the water, like it was a language only he and the sea spoke. The younger folks in town, they scoffed, called him a throwback, a relic. But what they didn't know was that the sea didn't just carry him, it kept him afloat, in more ways than one. I asked him once, while helping realign the prop shaft, "Why don't you take it easy, Walter? You've earned the rest." He gave a dry chuckle, voice like gravel. "If I stop," he said, "I'll start hearing things no one should have to hear." I didn't press. Freedom Gale wasn't just a boat, it was a haven, the only place where the war couldn't follow him. He often slept aboard her on calm nights, and sometimes, long after the town had gone still, I'd hear something carry across the water. Not words exactly, just a cry, from somewhere deep, the kind that doesn't fade when you wake up. We, the ones who'd been here long enough to remember when the docks smelled like fresh rope and diesel, we knew who Walter Briggs really was, but the newcomers didn't. To them, he was just the old man with the wooden boat, a piece of local color, quaint, picturesque, until they got bored and moved on to the next photo op. That morning, a Wednesday, started like any other. Cold, fog thick as sheep's wool. I was checking dock lines when I saw him, Walter, walking up, thermos in hand. We nodded to each other, no words needed. He stepped aboard Freedom Gale, untied her lines, fired up the old diesel. She gave that low, warm rumble, like something alive, waking from sleep. Then she slipped out across the water, the mist parting, just enough to make room for her. It was like the sea had been waiting. What I didn't know was that it would be her final voyage. It began with a sound that didn't belong. You know how some noises just fit a place? Gull cries, fog horns, the groan of old dock planks under work boots. That's what Bayfield Hollow usually sounded like. But that morning, just as the fog was thinning, I heard something else, something low, thunderous. It rolled across the water like a freight train wrapped in velvet. I looked up from the coil of rope I was mending, squinted toward the harbor mouth, and that's when I saw her. Avalon Dusk. She slid into the bay like a floating mansion, all white hull and chrome trim, glinting even through the mist. Her nameplate was big enough to read from shore, 4 decks high, stacked like a palace on the water. The engines purred, quiet but dangerous, like predators. And up top, laughing over mimosas, was a man I recognized instantly, Derek Whitmore. They called him the new Prince of Tech. Bought one of the last oceanfront properties in town, turned it into a private compound, drone-delivered cocktails and all. The paper called him a philanthropic visionary. I'd seen him once at the marina office. Didn't even look up from his phone when he signed the lease on the biggest slip we had. As Avalon Dusk pushed deeper into the harbor, my stomach dropped. She was headed straight for Walter. Freedom Gale was drifting quietly, maybe 100 yards from the dock. I could see her, pale sail catching the breeze, flag trailing behind like a memory. Walter stood at the helm, one hand on the tiller, the other raised, waving, not frantic, just a signal, a courtesy, something any real seaman would understand. But no one aboard Avalon Dusk was watching the water. They were too busy taking selfies. Bay behind them, champagne in one hand, smiles lit by expensive dental work. Derek had his arm around some influencer I recognized from a billboard, both of them leaning on the rail like they owned the tide. I shouted. Others did too. Dock hands, locals. We all saw it coming. A harbor patrol boat floated nearby. The officer looked uneasy, but didn't move. And then it hit. The sound wasn't explosive. It was worse. A deep, cracking crunch, like 100 ribs breaking at once. Avalon Dusk's bow didn't even shudder. But Freedom Gale, she splintered beneath it, her stern folded in on itself, like paper soaked through. And Walter? He jumped. I swear to God the man jumped. Just before the deck crumbled under his boots, he hit the dock hard, landed in a half roll, groaned, and his boat, his home, his history, broke apart right in front of him. The little flag on her bow tore free in the turbulence, spun in the wake, red stripes bleeding into white foam. Pieces of hull floated like driftwood, bobbing in shame. Avalon Dusk's engines finally cut out, and in the eerie silence that followed, "What are you?" I heard Derek's voice, clear as a bell. "It's just an old fishing tub. Get over it." Walter stood up slowly. His knees shook. He didn't curse, didn't raise a fist. He just limped toward the edge of the dock, eyes locked on the floating flag. His jacket was wet, his hands trembling. He reached down, painfully, deliberately, and pulled the flag from the water, pressed it to his chest, like something sacred. His head didn't bow, but his eyes were full of storms. People had started to gather. Morning joggers, dock workers, a group of tourists from a yoga retreat paused. Phones up, mouths open. Nobody stepped forward, nobody helped. Then Derek called down from his perch, smirking. "Nice boat, old-timer. Ever think maybe it's time to upgrade? Everything's got an expiration date." Walter didn't answer. He just turned, shoulders squared, back ramrod straight, and walked down the dock. Each step slow, each step heavy, but never broken. Behind him, someone chuckled. A phone chimed. I caught a glimpse of the caption. On the video now making its rounds online, "Boomer down, old man loses boat to progress." By noon, the harbor looked like nothing had happened. The debris was gone, cleaned up, towed out, problem solved. But from where I stood, something sacred had sunk with that boat, and the bay, for the first time in all my years, felt hollow. By that evening, it was like the whole thing had never happened. The wreckage was hauled away before lunch. Cleanup crew hired by the marina management, no doubt, pressured by the resort investors. A few pieces of Freedom Gale turned up in the scrap bins behind the bait shop. I saw them, recognized the hand-carved rail, the brass cleat Walter polished every week, just tossed in, with soda cans and busted crab traps. Nobody spoke about it. The harbor patrol wrote up a brief report. Limited visibility, lack of reflective gear. The insurance company said Walter's boat didn't meet modern compliance standards. No payout, no apology, just a few lines of legal speak, delivered by a too cheerful receptionist who didn't even pronounce his name right. Online, the video was going viral. People were laughing, making memes, calling him a boomer relic, saying he couldn't steer straight. Others said he should be grateful. Someone finally got rid of that eyesore. I wanted to scream, but Walter, he didn't. He just disappeared. Didn't come down to the docks the next morning. Didn't go into Murphy's for his usual black coffee and eggs. I found myself checking the southern bluff, where his cabin sat, windows dark. The sea was still there, licking the rocks like nothing had changed. But to me, the whole bay felt wrong, like the tide had pulled something sacred away. On the third day, I went to check on him. I knocked on the old wooden door. No answer. But after a minute, it creaked open on its own. Inside, everything was neat. Tools lined up in order, maps on the wall. On the table was a wooden chest, lid propped open. And inside, pieces of a life most people never saw. Black and white photos, young men in uniform, grinning in the sun, commendation letters with faded Navy SEALs, dog tags tangled in old lanyard cord, a strip of cloth with Walter's name stitched into it, brown from sweat, and at the bottom, folded into a perfect triangle, an untouched American flag. I didn't say a word, just stood there, hat in hand, until I heard a creak behind me. Walter was there. He looked tired, not just in his face, in the way he stood, like the very weight of being upright cost him something. He nodded once, said nothing, then limped to the table, picked up the flag, ran his hand across the stars. "I built her with my hands," he said quietly. 36 months, every board, every line. Didn't miss a sunrise in 40 years. I nodded, throat tight. "You gonna fight it?" I asked. "The marina?" "That kid." He shook his head. "Didn't hit me," he said. "Just something nobody else cared about." I wanted to argue, wanted to say the whole town was watching, that people were furious, but I looked into his eyes and saw something steadier than rage. It was grief, not the kind that burns fast and fades, the kind that settles, bone deep, the kind that rewrites the shape of a man. Later that night, I saw his grandson Ethan arrive, home early from college, broad-shouldered, eyes like his grandfather's, but younger, sharper. He didn't knock, just let himself in. I watched from the road as the two of them sat at the kitchen table, barely moving. Next morning, I found something posted to a quiet corner of the internet. An old veterans forum, dusty, half forgotten. A single photo, Walter kneeling by the water, clutching that torn flag to his chest. Captioned simply, "They sank more than a boat." It got 5 likes. But one of them had a profile badge I hadn't seen in years. U.S. Navy Alumni Association. Something stirred in my gut. The town may have moved on, but the sea never forgets its own. It started with fog, thick and low, clinging to the harbor like a breath that wouldn't release. I was on the docks just before dawn, tying down a skiff. Storm front was coming, or so the weather app claimed. Except the air was still. Too still. No birds, no wind. Just fog so dense it felt like you could scoop it with your hands. Then I heard it. 3 long blasts from the harbor horn. It wasn't scheduled, wasn't routine, and it wasn't a fishing boat coming home. Wasn't a ferry passing through. No, it was formal, deliberate, a signal, a warning, a ritual. I turned toward the sound, and out of the fog, like ghosts called home from war, 6 Navy ships emerged, gray silhouettes, cutting through the mist, every line sharp, every movement precise. Destroyers, support vessels. One, unmistakably, a command ship. Their flags flew at half-mast. No news cameras, no sirens, no fanfare, just presence. Bayfield Hollow froze. Shop owners dropped their open signs, walked to the shore. The yoga retreat canceled morning meditation. Kids were pulled from summer programs, their teachers too stunned to explain why. Even the marina manager, usually glued to his Bluetooth headset, stood slack-jawed, coffee spilling down his wrist. From where I stood, I could see the edge of Walter's cabin. He was already outside, standing straight, despite the limp, wearing his old Navy jacket, the one with faded patches and salt in the seams. His grandson Ethan was by his side, eyes wide. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The command ship docked with surgical precision, and from it stepped a man in full dress whites, Rear Admiral Alan Shepard. You didn't need to be military to know. He was someone important. The silence that followed his appearance, it felt earned. He walked down the gangway with crisp purpose. In his gloved hands, a perfectly folded American flag, triangle sharp, corners tight, blue field of stars facing outward. He didn't go to the mayor, didn't look at the crowd. He walked straight toward Walter. Then, he saluted. "Chief Petty Officer Walter Briggs," he said, voice deep, steady, "permission to come ashore and render honors." Walter blinked. The salute rose. Muscle memory unfolding before thought. "Permission granted, Admiral." The Admiral stepped onto the dock, followed by a full-color guard. Behind them, sailors on all 6 ships stood at attention, shoulder to shoulder, facing shore. The Admiral turned to the crowd. 45 years ago, during a violent storm in the South China Sea, this man manually sealed a ruptured cooling chamber aboard the USS Grafton, preventing toxic gas from reaching sleeping quarters. He sustained burns to 60% of his body. His actions saved 131 lives. A gasp rippled through the crowd. I heard someone whisper, "I never knew." The Admiral continued. He declined the Navy Cross, said it belonged to the boys who didn't make it back. He asked for no credit, no tribute. He served quietly, then came here and kept serving in silence. He turned his gaze toward the Avalon dusk, still bobbing smugly at its private slip. Yesterday, his vessel was destroyed in these waters. No assistance was offered, no respect was shown. The flag he served under was allowed to sink. The United States Navy does not forget its own. A young sailor stepped forward, holding a wooden plaque, polished to a mirror shine. He knelt, offered it to Walter. I edged close enough to read the engraving. "To the man who kept the sea safe, even after the uniform came off." Then came the moment I'll carry with me forever. The color guard raised their flags. The 6 ships blew their horns in perfect unison. Every sailor on deck saluted. The crowd, all of us, stood in a stunned silence as a full naval tribute unfolded in the heart of our forgotten little harbor. No one scrolled their phones. No one asked if it was real. Even Derek Whitmore, watching from Avalon Dusk's upper deck, looked like a man suddenly aware he was standing on the wrong side of history. When the ceremony ended, the Admiral leaned in close to Walter and said something I didn't catch. But I saw Walter nod, just once. People began to cry, to clap, to reach out with trembling hands. I looked up at those gray ships now turning slowly back to sea, and I realized this wasn't just about a boat or a man. It was about remembrance, about honor, long overdue, about silence breaking open like dawn after a night that went on too long. The Navy had returned, not with weapons, but with witness. Something shifted after the ships left. It wasn't loud. No speeches from politicians. No breaking news ticker. Just a different kind of quiet in Bayfield Hollow. The kind that lingers, like the hush after a hymn. People started showing up at Walter's cabin. Some came with casseroles, unsure what to say. Others brought toolboxes, offering to fix things that didn't need fixing. A few just stood on the road for a while, then walked away, like they needed to see it was real. The harbor master, a man who once called Freedom Gale an insurance nightmare, handed Walter a letter. Lifetime mooring rights, free of charge, signed and sealed, no expiration date. The marina owner offered to rebuild the dock slip in Walter's name. But Walter shook his head. "I don't want my name carved into the wood," he said. "Just a place where people can sit a while." He paused. 3 words, that's all. 2 weeks later, a woodworker from Portland arrived, brought in a bench, reclaimed teak, polished till it glowed amber in the sun. On the backrest, in simple bronze lettering, Sit. Remember. Thank. He asked for no unveiling, no ceremony, but the whole town came anyway. Even Derek Whitmore showed up. No entourage, no sunglasses, just a plain gray hoodie and an envelope in hand. When he reached Walter, he hesitated, then offered it. "It's a blank check," he said. "Whatever you think is fair. I know I can't undo it, but—" Walter looked at it for a long moment, then shook his head. "Money doesn't rebuild what matters." Derek's voice cracked. "Then tell me how to make it right." Walter's answer? Calm, kind even. "Put your hands on something real. Help build something that'll last longer than your image." And for once, the man listened. The next morning, he showed up at the dock. Work gloves on, sleeves rolled. He spent the whole day sanding planks, hauling rope, eating cold sandwiches like the rest of us. No cameras, no PR stunt, just work. A week later, the town held a quiet dedication at Walter's old mooring. At the edge of the dock, near the new bench, stood a stone marker. No flashy inscription, just Freedom Gale 1981-2024, a vessel that carried more than one life. Children began gathering at the dock after school. At first, they came out of curiosity. The stories of Navy ships had spread fast. But then they stayed. They sat beside Walter as he taught them to tie a bowline, read the tide, listened to the sea. He didn't talk about the war or the accident. He talked about wind, about balance, about knowing when to push forward and when to let go. One afternoon, I sat nearby. A little girl, maybe 6 or 7, watched Walter demonstrate a figure-8 knot, her brow furrowed, fingers fumbling. Then she asked, "Are you mad at the man who broke your boat?" Walter paused, rope still in his hands. He looked out at the water for a long moment, then said quietly, "No. If it hadn't happened, maybe nobody would have remembered the boat at all." She nodded, like it made perfect sense. Maybe to her, it did. That evening, Ethan pulled up in a borrowed pickup. In the bed of the truck, draped in canvas, something extraordinary. A new boat, built from his grandfather's original design. Same curves, same sail shape. But this one had modern safety features tucked beneath the classic frame. Donated materials, volunteer hands, veterans from 4 states helped. On the stern, freshly painted in navy blue, Freedom's Legacy. Walter climbed aboard in silence. His hands brushed the rail like he was greeting an old friend in a brand new coat. A new American flag snapped in the breeze. Ethan handed him a small brass plate. It read, "For a man who kept faith, even when no one was looking." That night, as the sun dipped low and the sea turned gold, I watched from the bench as Walter sailed her for the first time, just a slow loop around the harbor. The same path he'd taken every morning for decades. A young couple strolled past with their son. The boy stopped at the bench, traced the words with his finger. "What does it mean?" he asked. His father knelt beside him. "It means," he said gently, "we don't always see the people who carry us, but we should never forget to thank them." Walter didn't ask for justice, didn't seek fame. He just picked up a torn flag and walked away. But the next morning, the sea remembered him, and this time, so did the world. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way, often in the quietest places. Not everyone who helps wants recognition. Some just need to know that today, someone isn't going hungry. And sometimes, that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to Grateful Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.